There are books you read, and then there are books that read you, books that feel less like objects and more like thresholds. The Red Book by Carl Jung is not simply a text. It is an event, a rupture, a confrontation between a rational man and the unknown forces that live beneath reason. It is the private record of a mind willing to descend into its own depths without anesthesia. For over a century, this massive red volume remained hidden from the public eye, while Jung published scholarly works that shaped modern psychology, introducing ideas like archetypes, the shadow, individuation, the collective unconscious. This book remained locked away, not because it was unfinished, not because it lacked value, but because it was too dangerous to misunderstand. Jung himself warned that to the superficial observer it would appear like madness. And perhaps that is the first key to understanding the Red Book. It lives at the boundary where genius and madness seem indistinguishable, where language dissolves into image, where logic gives way to myth. Imagine the scene: a world-renowned psychiatrist, colleague and later rival of Sigmund Freud, respected intellectual, respected father, respected clinician, suddenly confronted by something he cannot explain. Not with theory, not with science, not with the vocabulary of academia. In 1913, Jung began experiencing intense inner visions, not fleeting thoughts, not symbolic dreams that fade at dawn, but vivid, immersive encounters. He saw rivers of blood flooding Europe before World War I began. He saw gods speaking. He conversed with figures that seemed autonomous, alive, ancient. He could have suppressed them. He could have medicated himself. He could have denied their existence. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He decided to enter them consciously. He called this process active imagination. Rather than dismissing the images as pathology, he treated them as communications from the unconscious. He wrote them down meticulously. He illustrated them. He engaged them in dialogue. The Red Book is not theory, it is confrontation. It is what happens when a man trained in rationalism allows himself to descend into myth. It is the journal of a soul dismantling its own certainty. The physical book itself is extraordinary, bound in red leather, inscribed in gold Latin, Liber Novus, the new book. The pages resemble medieval manuscripts, thick parchment, elaborate calligraphy, full-page paintings bursting with symbolic intensity, serpents, mandalas, angels, demons, cosmic landscapes. It looks ancient, but it is modern, and that paradox mirrors its content. Jung was not attempting to write literature. He was attempting to survive his own psyche. He feared he was losing his mind, but he also sensed something else, that this descent was necessary, that the stability he had built around his identity as a scientist was incomplete, that the unconscious was not a pathology to cure, but a realm to encounter. Most of us build identities to protect ourselves from chaos. Jung dismantled his deliberately. He described this period as a confrontation with the unconscious, so intense that he often questioned whether he would return intact. He saw himself as standing at the edge of an abyss, but instead of stepping back, he leaned forward. The Red Book is the record of that leaning. Why was it hidden for so long? Because it exposes something terrifying, that beneath every orderly life exists a wilderness. Beneath every intellectual system exists myth. Beneath every carefully constructed self-image exists a multiplicity of voices. Jung risked everything, his reputation, his sanity, his legacy, by allowing those voices to speak. And when he died in 1961, the book was sealed in a vault. Scholars speculated wildly. Some believed it would reveal proof of insanity. Others believed it contained a lost scripture. When it was finally published in 2009, what emerged was neither madness nor doctrine. It was a map. Not the external world, but of the terrain within. The Red Book reveals that transformation does not begin with enlightenment. It begins with collapse, with the cracking of certainty, with the realization that the self we thought we were is only a fragment. Jung did not discover new ideas during this period. He discovered himself. And that is infinitely more destabilizing, because once you encounter the deeper layers of your psyche, you cannot return to ignorance. You cannot pretend the surface is the whole story. The Red Book is not comfortable reading. It does not explain itself neatly. It does not reassure. It demands something. It demands that you ask yourself whether your stability is genuine or merely constructed. It asks whether your beliefs are chosen or inherited. It asks whether you have ever truly listened to the voices beneath your conscious narrative. Most spiritual texts promise transcendence. The Red Book promises confrontation, and that is why it matters. It is not a relic of a disturbed man. It is the record of someone brave enough to face what most of us spend our lives avoiding, the abyss, and the possibility that within it something sacred waits, not as salvation, but as integration. There are moments in a life when the ground does not merely shake, it dissolves. When the structures that once defined you fall away, not gradually, but with an almost surgical precision. For Jung, the collapse did not begin with visions. It began with rupture, with separation, with the unbearable weight of standing alone against the intellectual titan who had once been mentor, ally, almost father. To understand what followed, you have to understand the cost. Freud was not simply a colleague. He was the center of a movement. In the early 20th century, to challenge Freud was to exile yourself from the emerging authority of modern psychology. Jung knew this. He foresaw the isolation. He anticipated the backlash. Yet something inside him refused silence. Freud saw libido as primarily sexual energy. Jung sensed something vaster, a psychic energy that animated religion, myth, creativity, transformation. Freud saw incest as literal pathology. Jung saw it as symbolic rebirth, a mythic motif embedded in cosmogonies across cultures. Freud traced neurosis to childhood conflict. Jung perceived layers beneath the personal unconscious, archetypal depths older than the individual, older than civilization. The disagreement was not academic, it was ontological. Freud's worldview was grounded in reduction. Jung's was expanding toward mystery, and mystery threatened the order of the field. When Jung chose to publish his divergent ideas, he was not merely altering theory, he was detonating his professional identity. The cost was immediate, reputation fractured, colleagues withdrew, support evaporated. He moved from heir apparent to heretic almost overnight. Isolation is not abstract when it is social. It is visceral. It is the silence of phones that no longer ring, the absence of invitations, the subtle shift in tone when your name is mentioned. Jung anticipated it. He claimed he harbored no illusions. But anticipation does not soften impact. The human psyche does not pass through such ruptures untouched. It was during this liminal period, suspended between what he had been and what he would become, that the inner world began to surge. He described a pressure building in the air itself, a sense that something immense was moving through, reality not only within him. In October 1913, the vision arrived unbidden, a flood, not symbolic in the abstract sense, but immersive. He saw Northern Europe submerged, cities drowned, civilization reduced to rubble carried by yellow waves, thousands dead. And then the water turned to blood. He was not merely imagining catastrophe, he was experiencing it with the intensity of perception. This was months before the outbreak of World War I. Imagine the psychological impact. A psychiatrist, already ostracized, already destabilized by professional rupture, now confronted with apocalyptic imagery rising from within his own mind. He feared psychosis, he feared collapse, He feared losing command of himself. Yet he made a choice that defines the entire narrative. He did not suppress the visions. He did not retreat into denial. He descended into them. He later wrote that he knew he had to let himself plummet into the fantasies or risk their domination over him. He recognized the paradox. As a psychiatrist, he could not guide patients into the depths of their unconscious if he himself refused the descent. This is not romantic. It is terrifying. To willingly enter one's own psychic abyss requires more than curiosity. It requires surrender of control. And control is precisely what a rational mind is trained to preserve. Jung began recording everything: conversations with inner figures, dialogues with entities that appeared autonomous, encounters with archetypal presences that felt older than his individual consciousness. He was not merely journaling, he was engaging. He called it active imagination, the deliberate confrontation with the contents of the unconscious without succumbing to them. But there is a razor-thin boundary between confrontation and possession. He walked it daily. The break with Freud stripped him of intellectual shelter. The visions stripped him of psychological certainty. He found himself between worlds, no longer the disciple, not yet the independent pioneer, no longer grounded in collective validation, not yet stabilized in his own mythic understanding. Liminality is dangerous. In transitional states, identity softens, definitions blur, the psyche becomes permeable, and when permeability meets depth, eruption follows. Jung's flood vision did not feel symbolic at first. It felt prophetic, concrete. The atmosphere itself seemed darker to him, oppressive, as if the collective psyche of Europe was swelling toward catastrophe. When the war erupted months later, he did not interpret his visions as madness. He interpreted them as contact with something collective, the shared unconscious stirring toward violence. This realization altered everything. If the unconscious was not merely personal but collective, then its contents were not random. They were structural, archetypal, universal. The Red Book becomes the laboratory where this realization is tested, but do not mistake this for a calm research project. It was chaos, disciplined by courage. Jung feared that if he did not enter the fantasies voluntarily, they would overpower him involuntarily. The psyche demands integration. Repression breeds eruption. Avoidance breeds fragmentation. He chose integration. The flood was only the beginning. Soon came figures: Elijah, Salome, Philemon, archetypal presences that seemed to possess independent will. Philemon, in particular, emerged as a guide, a wise old man figure who spoke with authority beyond Jung's conscious knowledge. Jung did not claim these figures were external spirits. He understood them as personifications of psychic contents, yet their autonomy felt undeniable. This is the crux of the mystery. The unconscious is not inert material waiting for analysis. It is dynamic, alive, structured in symbolic intelligence. Most people encounter fragments of it through dreams and fleeting intuitions. Jung entered it deliberately. The Red Book documents not only visions, but transformations. Each encounter destabilized his ego identity further. Each dialogue stripped another layer of certainty. He confronted shadow aspects: pride, ambition, spiritual inflation. He faced impulses he preferred to deny. The descent dismantled him, but dismantling was necessary. Modern psychology often emphasizes stabilization. Jung's journey emphasized confrontation. He believed that the psyche moves toward wholeness, but only if its opposites are acknowledged. The flood, the blood, the archetypal figures, these were not symptoms to eliminate. They were messages to decode, and decoding required immersion. He painted what he saw. Mandalas emerged spontaneously, symmetrical circular patterns representing psychic totality. Later, Jung would recognize these as symbols of the self, the archetype of wholeness that transcends ego. But at the time, he was simply surviving. He described sitting with his visions for hours, allowing images to unfold, refusing to look away. There is something almost monastic about the discipline, a scientist transforming into a mystic, not by abandoning intellect, but by extending it into territory intellect alone cannot govern. Isolation intensified the experience. Without community affirmation, the inner world becomes louder. Without external structure, internal architecture rearranges itself. The break with Freud was not incidental to the Red Book. It was catalytic. Had Jung remained within Freud's orbit, it is unlikely he would have risked such descent. Security breeds conformity. Exile breeds invention. History often romanticizes the dark night of the soul, but living through it is neither poetic nor graceful. It is destabilizing. Identity fractures, meaning evaporates, familiar frameworks collapse. Jung endured this without public reassurance. He continued seeing patients, continued presenting himself as functional. Yet, privately, he was wrestling with mythic forces. The Red Book is the artifact of that wrestling. It is neither clinical case study nor theological treatise. It is experiential cartography, a mapping of inner terrain few dare to chart consciously. And here lies its enduring power. It reveals that psychological growth is not linear ascent, but cyclical descent. Not accumulation of knowledge, but confrontation with contradiction. Not spiritual bypass, but integration of shadow. Jung did not emerge from this period claiming purity. He emerged claiming complexity. The flood did not annihilate him. It initiated him. And what began as fear of losing command became recognition that command itself was an illusion. The psyche is not governed by force. It is engaged through dialogue. The Red Book is the record of a man learning to converse with his own depths without drowning in them. It is a testament to the idea that madness and revelation may share a doorway, and that what determines the outcome is not the absence of chaos, but the courage to face it without denial. The river turned to blood, and Jung did not run. The winter that followed did not bring silence. It brought repetition. The vision of the flood returned with greater intensity, more blood, more insistence. What at first felt like a singular psychic rupture now carried the rhythm of prophecy. Jung described feeling perplexed, nauseated, ashamed of what he perceived as weakness. The images felt invasive, alien, as though something beyond his control had breached the walls of his rational mind. When the inner voice told him, "Look at it well. It is wholly real, and it will be so. You cannot doubt it," the statement did not comfort him, it disturbed him. Real in what sense? Real as an external event? Real as a psychic inevitability? Real as an archetypal truth manifesting through the personal psyche? At the time, war was not his interpretation. He feared psychosis instead. He believed he might be losing coherence, that the flood and blood were symptoms of internal collapse. The mind of a psychiatrist is trained to categorize, to differentiate hallucination from imagination, pathology from symbolism. Jung stood in the middle of that distinction, unsure which side he occupied. Then came the frost dreams, an arctic cold descending in summer, landscapes frozen, canals iced over, green life extinguished. 3 times the dream repeated, each occurrence intensifying the sense of cosmic intrusion. In the final dream, a tree stood without fruit, its leaves transformed by frost into grapes filled with healing juice. He plucked them and gave them to a waiting crowd. The imagery is almost mythic in structure: death, desolation, then transformation into nourishment. But Jung did not immediately interpret it through mythology. He was still attempting to discern whether he was witnessing the psyche's symbolic language or the onset of mental fragmentation. When World War I erupted, the coincidence was staggering. The flood of blood, the killing frost, the desolation of Europe, these were no longer abstractions. Reality mirrored the imagery. The question then shifted. If the visions were not merely personal pathology, what were they? Jung concluded that his task was to probe the depths of his own psyche, to determine the extent to which his inner experiences coincided with the collective experience of humanity. The investigation would not be academic, it would be experiential. He would descend deliberately into the psychic underworld and document what he encountered. He designed a method that was deceptively simple. Enter a meditative state, calm the emotions enough to maintain awareness, then allow the images to emerge without suppression. He practiced yoga to steady himself, but he did not use it to escape the visions. He used it only to maintain equilibrium so that he could re-enter the confrontation consciously. The process he described as digging a hole was not metaphorical in the casual sense. He visualized the act of excavation as real. The hole deepened. The descent intensified. He treated the fantasy as literal within the inner world, following it as though it were a physical act. This is a crucial distinction. He did not analyze the images from a distance. He inhabited them. The archetype of the cave, the hole, the descent, these are ancient motifs, from Orpheus descending into Hades to Christ entering the tomb, from Mithric initiation rites in underground chambers to the myth of Persephone. Descent precedes transformation. Jung was not consciously performing a ritual, reenactment of myth, yet the structure mirrored myth precisely. As he descended in fantasy, he reached a point where vertical movement ceased. He then turned horizontally, a corridor, black slime, a liminal space, neither above nor below, neither conscious nor unconscious, but between. This threshold state is psychologically volatile. When identity loosens and the unconscious becomes permeable, the psyche generates imagery with startling autonomy. On December 12, 1913, he titled an entry, "Descent into Hell in the Future." The language alone indicates that he recognized the gravity of what he was entering. He described voices filling the air, a loud cry, "I am falling," confusion, fear, the sensation of relinquishing control. He asked himself whether he should entrust himself to the madness of his own darkness. This is not romantic mysticism. It is confrontation with fragmentation. To descend consciously into what feels like madness requires extraordinary discipline. The ego resists dissolution. The rational mind seeks structure. Yet Jung permitted the disintegration to proceed under observation. He did not identify with the voices. He recorded them. This recording is essential. Writing becomes containment. By inscribing the visions in calligraphy, by painting their forms, he created a boundary around chaos. The Red Book is not simply a diary, it is a vessel. The act of artistic transcription stabilizes what might otherwise overwhelm. The descent introduced figures who spoke independently of his conscious will. Elijah appeared, a prophetic archetype. Salome followed, blind yet visionary. Philemon emerged as a wise guide. Jung insisted that these figures possessed autonomy. They corrected him, they instructed him, they challenged his assumptions. From a clinical standpoint, this borders on dissociation. From a symbolic standpoint, it is dialogue with the unconscious. Jung maintained awareness that these figures were psychic contents, not external spirits. Yet, their authority felt real. Philemon, in particular, represented a superior insight that transcended Jung's personal knowledge. He described him as having wings of a kingfisher and keys in his hand, a mythic embodiment of wisdom. Through these dialogues, Jung confronted his own spiritual inflation. He realized how easily the ego identifies with archetypal power. The danger was not in encountering the unconscious, but in claiming it as personal superiority. The descent dismantled illusions. He confronted his shadow, ambition, pride, resentment. He confronted the temptation to become a prophet instead of a psychologist. He faced the possibility that his visions could be interpreted as divine revelation, and he rejected that inflation deliberately. He insisted on psychological interpretation rather than metaphysical self-exaltation. The frost dream's tree-bearing healing grapes become symbolic in retrospect. In the midst of devastation, nourishment emerges. But the nourishment is not external salvation. It is psychic integration. World War I contextualized the flood and frost. The collective unconscious was erupting. Nations descended into violence with a fervor that defied rational calculation. Jung recognized that his inner visions paralleled collective catastrophe. He was not uniquely insane. He was resonating with archetypal turbulence. This realization reframed his task. If the psyche contains collective layers, then individual descent is not solely personal therapy. It is participation in humanity's deeper patterns. The archetypes are not private inventions. They are shared structures manifesting uniquely in each individual. The Red Book therefore becomes a bridge between personal and collective consciousness. Jung's method of active imagination allowed him to engage unconscious material without succumbing to psychosis. He established a dialogue rather than a possession. He asked questions, he listened, he wrote responses. He did not censor the disturbing incontent, but neither did he abandon critical reflection. This balance is delicate. Too much skepticism and the imagery collapses into repression. Too much immersion and the ego dissolves into fragmentation. Jung navigated between these poles with conscious effort. The corridor of black slime represents psychic ambiguity. It is neither structured like conscious thought nor chaotic like dream sleep. It is a liminal chamber where images crystallize into form. In this chamber, time alters. Logical. Sequencing loosens. Mythic narratives unfold spontaneously. Jung did not impose structure. He allowed structure to emerge. The title, Descent into Hell in the Future, suggests not only personal descent, but prophetic symbolism. Hell is not geographic. It is psychological. It is confrontation with everything denied. The courage required for such descent is often underestimated. It is easier to theorize about shadow integration than to witness one's own cruelty, envy, weakness without denial. Jung did not romanticize the experience. He described fear, confusion, nausea, yet he persisted. Why? Because he understood that avoidance strengthens unconscious dominance. Only through confrontation can integration occur. The digging of the hole, the waiting in slime, the voices in darkness, these are stages of psychic initiation. Initiation is not bestowed, it is endured. The Red Book documents initiation in real time. It reveals that psychological transformation is not accumulation of knowledge, but surrender of control. It is not ascent into light, but descent into ambiguity. When Jung later articulated concepts like the shadow, the self, individuation, he was not theorizing abstractly. He was codifying lived experience. The flood vision, the frost dreams, the descent into black corridors, these were not poetic embellishments added later. They were catalysts. By probing his own psyche, Jung transformed what could have been breakdown into breakthrough. He refused to let the unconscious dictate his fate unconsciously. He engaged it consciously. The Red Book remains enigmatic because it is not sanitized. It does not present a stable authority instructing others. It presents a man destabilizing himself in order to understand. The descent is not spectacle, it is process, and in that process lies the foundation of everything Jung would later teach about individuation, that wholeness is achieved not by eliminating darkness, but by entering it without losing oneself. The voices did not vanish, the images did not cease, but Jung learned to walk within them without drowning. That is the true mystery. Whither? Whither? The word echoes like a command and a lament at once. You fall, and something within you insists on falling further, deeper, past the last place where reason feels secure. There is no gentle slope here. There is a plunge, a surrender to gravity that is not physical but psychic. The spirit of the depths does not whisper comfort. It pulls back the veil and forces the eyes to adjust to a darker spectrum of reality. A grey rock face appears, vast and indifferent, a surface both barrier and invitation. Along it you descend, scraping against stone, feeling the chill of something ancient and unmoved by your hesitation. At the entrance stands a dwarf clad in leather, a guardian figure who does not threaten yet does not welcome. He simply stands, minding the threshold. Every myth has such a figure, the one who ensures that descent is chosen, not stumbled into. You stand ankle-deep in black earth. It clings to you, dense and cold. The cave breathes shadows. They move across your vision like thoughts you tried to suppress and now cannot avoid. Fear rises not as panic, but as recognition. You know you must go further. The narrow crack in the rock is not meant for comfort. You crawl. The passage compresses you. Your shoulders scrape. Your breath shortens. The ego does not fit easily into this terrain. Inside, the cave widens. Its floor is coated in black. Water, stagnant and opaque. The air vibrates with shrieking voices, indistinct, overlapping, insistent. They do not form sentences. They are raw sound, the noise of unconscious content unfiltered by interpretation. Yet beyond the water, there is a glimmer. A red stone. Cold light radiates from it, not warm like fire, but steady and crystalline. 6 sides, structured, geometric, a paradox of order inside chaos. You wade forward. The water resists your movement. Mud clutches at your legs. The voices intensify as if proximity to the stone disturbs their territory. You reach it. It covers a dark opening in the rock, a seal over something hidden. When you lift it, you do not flee. You peer into the gap. Curiosity surpasses fear. You place your ear to the opening. The sound of underground water flows upward, not chaotic but steady. And in that current floats the bloody head of a man, not grotesque for shock but solemn, a hero slain, a consciousness severed. You watch the image without turning. Away. The mind wants to interpret immediately, to assign metaphor, to dilute impact, but you remain. A black scarab drifts past, glistening in the dark stream. Ancient symbol of death and rebirth, of the sun's journey through night. It does not hurry. It moves as though this river has carried such transformations forever. In the deepest reach of the water shines a red sun, not the sun of daylight, but one that radiates through darkness, a nocturnal sun, a paradoxical light that does not erase. Shadow, but illuminates within it. Small serpents crawl along the cave walls, drawn toward that red radiance. They do not threaten you, they converge. Hundreds, then thousands. They coil and veil the sun, obscuring its glow. Night thickens. A stream of blood surges upward, thick and insistent, then slowly recedes. The cycle of eruption and ebb. The terror that grips you is not about the imagery alone. It is about recognition. Something fundamental has been exposed. Something in you has died. Something in you must die. The blonde hero slain is not an external figure. It is an ideal, an identity, a version of the self elevated and admired. The scarab is not decoration. It is the inevitability of transformation. The red crystal, luminous yet cold, is the center. Structure in the depths, meaning concealed beneath horror. You hold it in your hand and understand that knowledge alone will not integrate what you have seen. The mind that once dissected symbols from a safe academic distance now kneels before them. Heal the wound that doubt inflicts on me, my soul. The plea is not intellectual, it is devotional. There is humility in the admission that thinking has become torment. Thought tears experience apart, analyzes it into fragments until vitality dissolves. The disciplined intellect, once your ally, now feels like a prison master. Science, once a noble tool, threatens to bind the soul in a cell of over-explanation. You ask when the hounds of thought will lie down, when the incessant commentary will quiet enough for something deeper to speak. The knowledge you accumulated roars like lions. It shakes the air. It demands coherence, classification, control. Yet here, control is precisely what must loosen. You ask protection from the serpent of judgment, the subtle voice that masquerades as healing while poisoning insight with condemnation. Judgment divides light from shadow prematurely. It pretends to clarify while severing wholeness. You do not want to rush into the depths as a thief, seizing fragments of revelation for egoic display. You want to descend, cleansed, astonished, unarmed, to lay your head upon stone and wait, to allow the experience to reshape you rather than to exploit it. The language reads like mysticism because it is the psyche speaking in its original tongue, before theory, before diagnosis, before reputation. The rational psychiatrist has stepped aside, not abandoned, but humbled. What remains is a human being confronting the totality of his interior world. The desert blooming with strange plants is not poetic exaggeration. When repression dissolves, neglected psychic material surfaces in unfamiliar forms, you will consider yourself mad. In a sense, you will be. Not because you have lost reality, but because your former reality was incomplete. Socrates described divine madness as prophecy, purification, poetic inspiration, and love. Each form disrupts ordinary consciousness. Each form suspends rigid rationality long enough for deeper currents to move. The red crystal, the scarab, the slain hero, these are not decorative hallucinations. They are archetypal condensations. Blood shining from the crystal becomes revelation. Murder in the depths of what is to come. The hero must fall. The black beetle signifies death necessary for renewal. The red sun of the depths signals a new orientation. Not a return to previous light, but an inversion. The struggle between light and darkness intensifies. It is not a battle of annihilation, but of integration. When blood bursts forth, it is life force released through rupture. Without rupture, stagnation persists. The slain hero represents the collapse of an inflated ideal, perhaps the obedient successor to established doctrine, perhaps the flawless rationalist, perhaps the spiritual aspirant who imagined ascent without descent. Whatever the form, it could not survive the confrontation. The scarab, rolling its dark sphere through subterranean waters, carries the sun. Through night, death becomes gestation. The red sun rising from below does not abolish shadow, it transforms the relationship to it. This is alchemy enacted within the psyche. Nigredo, the blackening, where the material decomposes. Albedo, whitening, where clarity begins to reappear. Rubedo, the reddening, where vitality returns in integrated form. The cave is the crucible. The voices are the bubbling of dissolution. The crystal is the fixed principle emerging from chaos. Fear is unavoidable. But fear does not signify failure. It signifies proximity to transformation. The reverence that follows the vision is not self-exaltation. It is awe before the psyche's depth. The ego bows not to external deity, but to inner totality. The soul becomes interlocutor. Trust replaces domination. This is the difference between collapse and conscious descent. Collapse is involuntary and disintegrative. Conscious descent observes and endures. It does not deny madness, it contextualizes it. When the Red Book captures these moments, it captures more than imagery. It captures process, a mind risking dissolution to achieve wholeness. The wounded hero, the scarab, the serpents, the red sun, all remain as symbols of necessary confrontation. The psyche demands sacrifice of partial identities. It demands recognition of shadow without moral hysteria. It demands surrender of intellectual arrogance. In return, it offers not certainty, but depth. To witness such writing is to witness alchemical transformation in progress, not polished philosophy, not finished doctrine, but raw material undergoing change. The voices shriek because repression breaks. The blood flows because vitality erupts. The serpents veil the sun because instinct encircles consciousness. The red crystal rests in your hand because structure survives even in chaos. You are stunned, and you choose to remain stunned. Not paralyzed, but receptive. Astonishment becomes discipline. The willingness to not understand immediately becomes strength. From this terrain, a new psychology will later emerge, not one that dismisses myth as primitive fantasy, not one that confines meaning to childhood trauma alone, but one that acknowledges collective symbols, archetypal patterns, and the necessity of descent. The river of blood, the frost, the cave, the crystal, each becomes foundational, not as prophecy alone, but as testimony that the psyche contains worlds vast enough to mirror history and intimate enough to transform a single life. And in that recognition, the descent ceases to be catastrophe. It becomes initiation. What is to come, you now live within. The vision was never merely a spectacle of images projected onto the canvas of the future. It was a mirror turned inward. If I could not have seen the murder within myself, I would not have recognized it in the world. The slaughter of the hero was not distant, not historical, not political alone. It was intimate. It was personal. Therefore, I am implicated. I am both the blade and the wound, the sacrificer and the sacrificed, the executioner and the one whose blood stains the ground. The sun of the depths does not rise after innocence remains intact. It rises after something has been torn open. And the thousand serpents that coil and rise to choke that sun are not monsters from mythology. They are impulses, instincts, resentments, fears, ambitions, jealousies. They are the living forces within us that recoil from transformation. They are the defenders of old order. They do not want the red sun to shine because its light reveals what was buried. When blood streams, it does not flow abstractly. It flows through individuals, through choices, through collective hysteria, through wars justified by righteousness, through ideologies convinced of moral superiority. The people demonstrate it in unforgettable acts, inscribing history in red ink. But if you imagine that this blood belongs only to others, you have missed the point entirely. The mystic voice is not madness in the clinical sense. It is madness in the sense that it refuses the reduction of experience to sterile explanation. The language grows symbolic because literal language collapses under the weight of what it attempts to contain. The Red Book does not read like a diary because it is not simply recording events. It is staging an encounter between consciousness and its own abyss. There is something theatrical about it, dramatic, visionary, dialogue with the soul as though the soul were an independent presence, because in many ways it is. The psyche, when encountered deeply enough, behaves as a living reality, not a passive construct. Why call it Liber Novus, the new book, while writing in Latin, the language of the old world? Because renewal does not erase tradition. it resurrects it. Latin carries the cadence of scripture, of law, of ancient authority. To write in Latin is to signal continuity with something archaic and sacred. Yet the content is new, because the descent is personal. It is not borrowed ritual, it is lived experience. There is a line where the soul insists the dead must be brought to life. What are the dead? Forgotten myths, abandoned symbols, rituals dismissed as superstition. The modern mind severed itself from its symbolic inheritance in the name of progress, but the psyche does not forget. It stores the archetypes in its depths. They wait. Was this descent an innovation or a revival? In ancient Greece, one did not simply analyze dreams in a clinic. One traveled to Delphi, one sought the Pythia, the oracle who entered trance and spoke with the voice of Apollo. The oracle did not give logical argument. She uttered riddles, ambiguous phrases, paradoxical warnings. The passing remark, "Is this the place of Pythia?" is not casual. It reveals recognition. The cave in the vision resembles the subterranean chamber beneath Delphi, the rock fissure, the vapors, the priestess seated above an opening in the earth, inhaling fumes, surrendering to possession, the god speaking through her. Imagine the scene: Mount Parnassus rising in the distance, olive groves trembling in Mediterranean wind, pilgrims ascending narrow paths with offerings in hand, nobles and peasants alike. The anxiety of not knowing whether the oracle will see you, the seventh day of the month, 9 months of the year, scarcity heightens significance. The temple stands at what the Greeks called the omphalos, the navel of the world. An egg-shaped stone marks the center. Zeus's eagles met here. Myth constructs geography into sacred space. The world needs a center. Consciousness needs a center. The procession approaches. Priestesses in laurel crowns. Sacrificial animals inspected. The ram taken. Blood offered. Ritual purification enacted. Before one can receive guidance, one must relinquish something. Sacrifice precedes revelation. The oracle's utterances were rarely clear. Beware the serpent coming behind thee. Was it metaphor, literal, strategic? Years later, historians trace the symbol to a shield bearing a serpent. Meaning becomes visible only after the event. This is how symbols operate. They are not predictive in the sense of calendar dates. They are participatory. They arise from a depth that perceives patterns before the conscious mind formulates them. The red sun seen in the cave might precede war. It might reflect collective tension brewing. It might reveal psychic currents that later manifest historically. But whether prophecy or projection, the crucial point remains. The descent makes the individual aware of participation. I take part in that murder. To see shadow externally without acknowledging it internally is to remain split. To condemn the world without confronting one's own capacity for cruelty is to perpetuate division. The mystic tone unsettles because it dissolves the boundary between psychological observation and spiritual confession. Colleagues label such language as dangerous. Mysticism threatens institutional certainty. It suggests that knowledge may arise from inner vision rather than empirical measurement alone. And yet, ancient cultures understood something modern rationalism often forgets. The psyche requires ritual. It requires symbolic descent. Without it, unconscious material erupts unconsciously. At Delphi, the Pythia prepared herself through purification. She chewed laurel leaves, she bathed in sacred spring water. She entered trance not casually but ceremonially. The vapors rising from the earth were believed to carry divine presence. Today, scholars debate geological explanations, but the experience remains. Altered consciousness producing oracular speech. Is there not a parallel between the Pythia seated above a fissure and the modern individual seated in meditation, digging a hole in imagination until reaching black slime? The corridor in darkness, the voices, the red stone covering the opening, the oracle beneath. The cave becomes Delphi within. The stone becomes the omphalos. The underground water becomes the river of collective unconscious. The scarab, Egyptian in origin, appears in a Greek-like cave. Cultures merge. Symbols cross boundaries. The psyche is not limited by geography. When Jung asks whether this is the place of Pythia, he acknowledges lineage. He is not inventing trance, he is rediscovering it. He is not creating archetypes, he is encountering them. The Greeks believed the oracle spoke for Apollo, god of light, prophecy and harmony. Yet Apollo's light did not eliminate darkness, it illuminated through it. The red sun in the cave radiates through black water, a sun of the night. Those who climbed Mount Parnassus carried questions about war, marriage, politics, plague. They did not receive step-by-step instructions. They received images, phrases, warnings. Interpretation required participation. Responsibility remained with the seeker. Likewise, the visions in the Red Book do not absolve the visionary of responsibility. They implicate him. I am a murderer and murdered. The oracle speaks, but the listener must integrate. What would it mean for modern humanity to reclaim such inner oracular dialogue without collapsing into delusion? It would mean cultivating humility before the psyche, recognizing that rational mastery does not exhaust reality. The Pythia's chamber was dark, subterranean. She did not speak from a throne under open sky. Revelation emerged from beneath. The unconscious, too, speaks from below consciousness. The omphalos stone marked the center of the world. The red crystal in the cave marks the center of the psyche. Both are covered until lifted. Both conceal openings. When the sacrificial ram is taken from the procession, it signals that entry into sacred knowledge requires offering. Something must die. In the cave vision, the blonde hero floats severed. The sacrifice is not animal but identity. The pilgrims wait anxiously because the oracle sees visitors only on appointed days. Timing matters. The psyche does not open on command. It opens when pressure builds sufficiently. Delphi was called the center of the world because myth located balance there. East and west meeting, eagle from sunrise and eagle from sunset converging. Similarly, the integrated psyche becomes a meeting point of opposites, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, reason and instinct. To call the Red Book a new book is to acknowledge that something ancient has been reawakened in a modern context, not medieval. Theology, not Greek ritual, but their underlying structure, descent, sacrifice, revelation, integration. When history later erupts in war, the vision of blood gains retrospective resonance. But its true significance remains psychological. The capacity for destruction lies in every individual. Collective catastrophe is amplified individual shadow. The mystic tone, then, is not escapism, it is confrontation. It strips away the illusion that evil exists only out there. It refuses simplistic narratives of moral purity. And perhaps that is why such writing remained hidden for decades, because it blurs the line between scientist and prophet, because it risks being misunderstood as insanity by those who demand empirical decorum. Yet what is sanity if it excludes awareness of the depths? What is health if it denies the red sun beneath the black water? To descend voluntarily into the cave is to participate in a tradition older than psychology. It is to join the lineage of those who sought the oracle within, not to escape the world, but to return to it with greater responsibility. The procession continues. The ram bleats. The priestess disappears into the temple. The seekers wait in silence. Somewhere beneath stone and earth, vapors rise. And within the modern mind, beneath professional titles and public reputation, another fissure opens. A stone is lifted. A voice speaks. The river flows. She leads him forward. The other two men remain behind, deemed unworthy to approach. The spring. Worthiness here is not measured by wealth or status, but by readiness, by an invisible alignment between seeker and threshold. The priestess gestures toward the Castalian spring, its waters cold and clear, running from the sacred slopes of Mount Parnassus. Before any question can be asked of the gods, the body must be purified. The dust of ordinary life must be washed away. The seeker kneels. Water runs over skin. It is not only a cleansing of flesh, but a symbolic stripping away of identity. Titles dissolve. Ambitions quiet. The mind grows alert in its humility. Above the temple doors, carved in stone, are two inscriptions: nothing in excess, know thyself. These are not decorative phrases. They are instructions for survival at the edge of the sacred. Excess destabilizes. Self-ignorance corrupts. When Pythia declared Socrates the wisest man because he knew nothing, she did not praise ignorance. She praised awareness of limitation. Wisdom begins where certainty ends. Inside the temple, darkness absorbs the senses. Candles flicker against walls, painted with Apollo's triumphs. Myrrh thickens the air. A harp echoes faintly down a corridor, its melody dissolving into stone. At the center, light spills through an opening in the dome, illuminating the omphalos stone, the navel of the world. The architecture itself mirrors the psyche, peripheral corridors in shadow, a luminous center above a concealed abyss. The Pythia is not merely a person, she is an office, a lineage. Like the Dalai Lama, the name refers both to the role and the one who inhabits it. When one dies, another takes her place. The continuity of the role outlives the individual. Tradition sustains the structure. The woman lends it breath. Her influence reshaped empires. Philip of Macedon was told he would conquer with silver spears. He interpreted silver as wealth, seized the mines of Thrace, and leveraged currency into power. Symbol becomes strategy. Prophecy becomes action. Alexander tamed Bucephalus by recognizing that the horse feared its own shadow. He turned the animal toward the sun, so the shadow fell behind it. A simple insight into fear opened the path to legend. Shadow acknowledged becomes strength harnessed. Selection of a new Pythia requires renunciation. The chosen woman must surrender family, possessions, prior identity. She dresses as a virgin, not to erase her age, but to symbolize rebirth into sacred function. Her personal life dissolves into archetype. She becomes vessel. Descending the steps into the lower chamber, torches illuminate stone slick with moisture. The cavern lies beneath the temple floor, positioned above a geological fault. Vapors rise naturally from the earth's fractures. The seat, three-legged golden, rests above a chasm from which smoke curls upward. Whether intoxicating gas or symbolic breath of the underworld, the effect is the same: altered consciousness. She sits, hooded, perhaps 50 years old, chewing oleander leaves. Priests form a circle around her. Some chant softly, others wait with parchment to transcribe. In trance, she speaks, sometimes in verse, sometimes in fragmented utterances. The priests shape her sounds into language the seekers can carry home. Is the cavern a physical location or a metaphor for a mental descent? When Jung wonders in his vision, is this the place of Pythia? He may be asking whether he has reached that interior chamber where images arise unbidden. The mind, when sufficiently quieted and surrendered, becomes a cave. Beneath the rational floorboards of daily life lies a fissure. Vapors rise, symbols speak. Humans have always sought entry into such spaces. Through ritual, meditation, fasting, intoxication, solitude. The Red Book sessions are not eccentric innovation. They are a revival of an archaic confrontation with the unconscious, not imitation of Greece or Egypt, but reactivation of the same psychic structure that produced Delphi. In the Red Book, figures appear: Elijah, Salome, Philemon. They are not literary inventions, they behave as autonomous presences. Jung converses with them, argues, questions. The drama is internal, yet unfolds as dialogue. This is the psyche revealing multiplicity. Consciousness is not a monologue, but a counsel. Elijah emerges as prophet, bearer of ancient fire. Salome appears blind, yet perceiving. Philemon later arrives as a wise old man with kingfisher wings. These figures are not hallucinations in the pathological sense. They are personifications of psychic forces. To meet them is to meet one's own complexity. When Jung encounters Elijah, he confronts the religious impulse within himself, the prophetic, uncompromising voice. Salome embodies eros, longing, dangerous devotion. He resists her. He fears what she represents, but resistance intensifies encounter. The psyche insists. Reading these dialogues feels like theatre staged in a cathedral of the mind. Tension arises. The ego wants to remain in control. The figures disrupt it. They speak truths he would rather not hear. They demand recognition. This is the danger of dissent. Once you enter the cavern, you cannot dictate what rises from it. The Pythia does not choose which god speaks. She surrenders to possession. Jung's practice of active imagination parallels this surrender. He enters trance, then allows images to unfold without censorship. The ego becomes witness rather than director. But witnessing is not passive. It requires endurance. Fear surfaces. Doubt intrudes. Is this madness or revelation? The boundary blurs, yet the disciplined recording of the visions anchors the process. He writes carefully, calligraphically, transforming chaos into script. The act of writing is containment. In the temple, priests interpret the oracle's speech. In the Red Book, Jung interprets his visions in reflective passages following the dramatic scenes. Image and analysis coexist. Myth and psychology intertwine. The scarab in the cave recalls Egyptian rebirth. The red sun evokes alchemy. Serpents choke light, reminiscent of apocalyptic imagery. Symbols cross traditions. The collective unconscious does not respect cultural borders. It recycles motifs in new configurations. When the Pythia speaks of serpents, of conquest, of shadow, the meaning depends on the listener's integration. Philip hears silver spears and sees mines. Alexander hears prophecy and sees opportunity. Jung hears the sun of the depths and sees psychological transformation. To ask whether Jung's state mirrors Pythia's is to recognize continuity in human exploration of inner space. Both enter altered consciousness. Both return with symbolic utterance. Both rely on interpreters, priests or readers to contextualize the message. The revival of the ancient does not mean regression. It means reclaiming a dimension neglected by modernity. Rationality alone cannot metabolize trauma, conflict, or existential dread. Symbols mediate what logic cannot. Elijah challenges Jung's assumptions. Salome destabilizes his moral posture. Philemon later becomes teacher. Each figure embodies a facet of psyche seeking acknowledgement. Integration does not eliminate them, it establishes dialogue. The cavern beneath Delphi was believed to connect to underworld powers. The unconscious similarly connects to primordial strata of experience. It is not merely personal memory, but ancestral pattern. In confronting these figures, Jung is not escaping reality. He is expanding it. The Red Book documents not an abandonment of science, but a widening of its lens. Analytical psychology becomes rooted not only in case studies, but in lived myth. Standing in the cavern, torches flicker. Smoke coils upward. The Pythia's voice trembles, then steadies. A question has been asked. The response emerges in fragments. Priests lean in to capture each syllable. In another century, a man sits at a desk near Zurich. He closes his eyes. He imagines digging downward. He reaches black water. He lifts a red crystal. He hears voices. He writes, "Across millennia the pattern repeats, descent, encounter, return. The temple eventually fell silent. Earthquakes fractured stone. Christianity rose. The oracle ceased. But the structure of descent remained within the human psyche. It waits for recognition." When Jung resurrected this method, he risked reputation. Colleagues labeled him mystic, but perhaps mysticism is simply psychology that dares to enter its own cave. Elijah and Salome are not ghosts from Scripture, they are energies within. To argue with them is to argue with oneself. To embrace them is to embrace contradiction. And perhaps that is the true inheritance from Delphi. Know thyself, not superficially, not morally alone, but mythically. Descend, listen, integrate, return, bearing awareness that light and shadow share the same source. The seeker emerges from the cavern, altered. The purification at the spring was not the end, but the beginning. After bathing, after surrendering offerings, after hearing the oracle, one must still walk back down the mountain and live. So too with the Red Book. It is not a retreat from the world. It is preparation for re-entry. The descent fuels future articulation of archetypes, shadow, collective unconscious. The visionary chaos crystallizes into theory. In the flicker between torchlight and rising smoke, between calligraphy and symbol, between prophet and psychologist, a continuity becomes visible. The ancient temple and the modern study are not opposites, they are mirrors. And beneath both, a chasm remains, breathing, whispering, waiting for those willing to descend. What unfolds in this encounter is not a random fantasy, but a confrontation with forces that Jung intuits are autonomous within the psyche. He is not merely imagining Elijah and Salome, he is encountering them as living presences. The dialogue is charged with tension because it is not symbolic in a superficial sense. It is experiential. Jung is not interpreting myth from a distance, he is inside it. Elijah, the prophet of fire, stands for spiritual authority, vision, revelation. He is aligned with divine speech, with the voice that calls down lightning and names truth without compromise. Salome, by contrast, carries the stain of eros distorted, desire entangled with blood, the shadow of love twisted into destruction. In biblical memory, she is the dancer whose seduction leads to the beheading of John the Baptist. She is associated with lust, manipulation, and fatal charm. And yet in Jung's vision, Elijah says something shocking: "My wisdom and my daughter are one." He does not distance himself from Salome. He does not condemn her. He claims her. This is the moment of rupture. Jung's conscious mind recoils. How can prophetic wisdom be united with bloodthirsty seduction? How can holiness and horror belong to the same source? His outrage is moral, almost instinctive. He judges Salome. He judges the union. He insists on separation. But Elijah refuses the separation. The shock Jung experiences here is the collapse of dualism. He wants a world where light stands apart from darkness, where the prophet has no kinship with the femme fatale, where spirit and instinct are opposites. Instead, the vision insists that wisdom and eros are intertwined, sight and blindness are companions. Elijah's seeing and Salome's blindness bind them eternally. Blindness is crucial. Salome is blind in the vision. She does not see with physical eyes. Her blindness suggests that what she represents is not rational awareness, but instinct, longing, desire that does not calculate. She is eros without moral filter. She is attraction to what burns. When she asks Jung, "Do you love me?" the question is not romantic, it is existential. Can he love the rejected part of himself? Can he embrace the aspect of his psyche that terrifies him? He calls her a beast. He dreads her. Yet part of him remains behind when he flees. There is longing mixed with fear. The serpent climbing the tree adds another layer. The image evokes Eden, temptation, the fall. but it also evokes renewal, shedding skin, cyclical rebirth. The serpent is both poison and medicine. In Jung's symbolic language, it often represents the unconscious instinctual force that cannot be erased, but must be integrated. When Elijah says, "We are real and not symbols," the statement destabilizes Jung's intellectual defense. He cannot reduce the encounter to metaphor. Either guise. Figures insist on their autonomy. In analytical psychology, this is the recognition that archetypes are not abstractions, but dynamic energies that shape experience. Elijah represents the wise old man archetype, logos, spiritual authority, higher vision. Salome embodies anima in her darker, more dangerous form, eros, passion, destructive attraction. Jung's horror arises because he has moralized these forces. He wants the prophet pure and the dancer condemned. But the psyche does not respect moral simplifications. The prophet without eros becomes sterile. Eros without wisdom becomes chaos. The vision insists that they are two poles of the same current. Salome loved the holy man, Elijah says. Jung protests, she demanded his head. But Elijah reframes it. Love is not sanitized. It can be violent, obsessive, consuming. The energy that destroys can also awaken. The beheading of John the Baptist, symbolically, is the severing of old consciousness to make way for new revelation. The image is horrifying yet transformative. Jung senses something even more disturbing. Do I love her, and did I therefore murder the hero? Here the vision turns inward. The murdered hero may represent the old identity Jung inhabited before his break with Freud. The golden heir, the intellectual successor, the approved son of the psychological establishment. That hero has been slain. If Salome is eros, then perhaps it was Jung's own passion for truth, his refusal to conform, that executed the old hero. In that sense, Salome is not merely biblical. She is the disruptive force within Jung that demanded authenticity over loyalty. The spirit of the depths asks, must I love Salome? This is the crux of individuation. Must one love what one fears within oneself? Must one accept the shadow not by condemning it, but by acknowledging its power? Jung's dread of Salome mirrors his dread of madness. She is irrational, instinctual, seductive. She threatens his carefully constructed identity as rational. And psychiatrist, loving her would mean surrendering to something beyond control. It would mean admitting that the unconscious is not an enemy to conquer, but a partner to engage. The wild music he hears, the tambourine, the sultry night, signals Dionysian energy. The Apollonian clarity of Elijah's prophecy is invaded by rhythm and heat. Jung is torn between order and intoxication. This tension reflects a larger cultural fracture. Western consciousness had long privileged reason over instinct, morality over desire, light over shadow. Jung's vision exposes the cost of that split. The repressed does not disappear, it returns in distorted forms. By bringing Elijah and Salome together, the psyche stages a reconciliation of opposites. Not a comfortable reconciliation, but a painful one. The ego resists. It calls the union unholy. Yet the deeper voice insists it was so from the beginning. This echoes Jung's later concept of the conjunctio, the alchemical marriage of opposites, wisdom and eros, light. And dark, masculine and feminine, must unite for wholeness to emerge. The marriage is not symbolic in a sentimental sense. It is psychological necessity. The underworld setting reinforces this. Jung asks if he is among the dead. The descent is not metaphorical. It is a journey into layers of psyche beneath ordinary consciousness. In myth, heroes descend to retrieve treasure or insight, but they must confront monsters and riddles. Elijah's riddle is severe. Can Jung accept that holiness contains its opposite? Can he relinquish the comfort of moral superiority? Can he recognize that his own longing binds him to what he fears? When Jung rushes back into the night, he carries doubt and fascination. The vision does not resolve neatly. It lingers. The longing remains behind. This lingering is important. Transformation does not occur in a single revelation. It unfolds through repeated confrontation. In later years, Jung would identify Philemon as a guide figure representing superior insight. But Elijah and Salome are earlier, raw encounters. They shake the foundation. They destabilize the ego before any wisdom can crystallize. For a psychiatrist trained in scientific method, this inner drama must have been disorienting. Yet he chooses to record it faithfully. He does not sanitize the dialogue. He does not suppress his fear. He documents his horror and confusion. This honesty is what gives the Red Book its power. The encounter with Elijah and Salome is not about biblical literalism. It is about psychological reality. The figures are carriers of archetypal energy. They force Jung to confront the fact that the psyche contains contradictions that cannot be resolved through reason alone. To love Salome does not mean endorsing violence or indulgence. It means acknowledging the vitality of eros, the capacity for passion, the intensity that fuels creativity and transformation. To reject her entirely would mean amputating a part of himself. Similarly, to cling only to Elijah's prophetic authority would risk rigidity and inflation. The prophet without humility becomes tyrant. The psyche seeks balance. Jung's terror is the ego's terror of dissolution. If the opposites are one, then identity built on separation collapses. The moral self that judges, the rational self that categorizes, these structures weaken. Something deeper must emerge. In this sense, the Red Book documents not madness but initiation. Jung undergoes symbolic death and rebirth. The murdered hero, the rising sun of the depths, the serpents and blood, all are images of psychological transformation. The meeting with Elijah and Salome marks a turning point. It announces that the journey will not be a comfortable spiritual ascent. It will be a descent into contradiction, into paradox, into the union of forces the conscious mind would rather keep apart. And the question remains suspended in the dark. Must I love Salome? It is not only Jung's question. It is the question of anyone who dares to confront the unconscious without censorship. Elijah says, "What you sought above, you now find below. What you saw divided was always one." The vision does not resolve the tension by declaring light victorious over darkness. Instead, it reveals their exchange. The black serpent's head turns white. The white serpent does not destroy its rival. The struggle transforms both. This is not a moral tale. It is alchemy. Jung's first interpretation, that light overwhelms darkness, reveals his lingering dualism. He still hopes goodness will conquer evil, but the image does not show conquest. It shows transmutation. The darkness does not vanish. It changes. The white serpent does not triumph. It participates in the cycle. The serpent in Jung's symbolic universe is never merely evil. It is the movement between opposites. It is life that writhes, shifts, sheds skin. In ancient iconography, the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, represents totality, the self-contained whole. The wrestling serpents resemble this tension within unity. Elijah, standing above them, suggests a vantage point beyond conflict. The prophet watches the struggle but does not intervene. He asks Jung whether he understands. This question pierces deeper than the spectacle itself. It demands inner comprehension, not moral reaction. When Elijah reveals the temple of the sun, the vision shifts from battle to architecture. The summit collects light, stores it like water, and distributes it into the valleys, Light becomes water, illumination becomes nourishment, wisdom flows downward. But then Elijah shrinks, the towering prophet becomes dwarf-like, the figure of authority diminishes. He calls himself Mim and leads Jung downward again into darkness. The guide transforms, the prophet becomes a well-keeper, the heights lead back to depths. This inversion is essential. Jung climbs seeking transcendence, only to be led into a cave. He looks for spiritual ascent and encounters subterranean springs. The collected light is not meant to dazzle at the peak, it must descend into shadow. The dwarf's voice, "Whoever drinks from them becomes wise," echoes ancient mystery traditions. Wisdom does not lie in remaining on the summit. It requires immersion in hidden waters. Yet Jung hesitates. He cannot reach down. He loses courage. This moment is pivotal. He is shown the source of living water, yet he withdraws. Doubt resurfaces. The courtyard feels strange and silent. The air is clear, almost sterile. Light alone feels incomplete. Without descent, illumination becomes isolation. The serpent reappears, crawling from underworld to wall. Jung follows it. Again, the serpent bridges realms. It is the connecting thread. It shrinks as he shrinks. Scale dissolves. Heights become foundations. The temple above and the cave below are one structure. The revelation is subtle but profound. The separation between above and below collapses. The spiritual and the instinctual are not two worlds, but two perspectives of one terrain. What Jung perceived as distance, a starry distance, turns out to be illusion. Elijah says the place is the same. This is the collapse of spatial metaphor into psychological truth. Heaven and underworld coexist within the psyche. The temple and the cave are facets of one interior landscape. Christmas, as the date of this vision, adds another layer. It is the symbolic birth of divine light into darkness. In Christian myth, light enters a humble stable, not a palace. Jung's vision mirrors this paradox. The temple of the sun sits above, but true transformation occurs in the hidden well. The shrinking figures reinforce humility. As Jung and the serpent become small, the mountain grows immense. The ego's scale diminishes relative to the totality of the psyche. What once seemed monumental becomes fragmentary. The dual serpents are not merely moral opposites. They are complementary currents. Black and white interpenetrate. The black serpent's whitening head suggests that what we resist contains latent illumination. Conversely, the white serpent's retreat suggests that purity without engagement weakens. In alchemical imagery, nigredo, the blackening, precedes albedo, the whitening. Transformation requires descent into darkness before purification. Jung's vision stages this sequence symbolically. When Elijah declares the temple collects sunlight, he describes consciousness. Awareness gathers experience, distills insight. But insight must irrigate the valleys, daily life, instinct, emotion. Without that flow, wisdom stagnates. The dwarf aspect of Elijah is particularly striking. Authority reduces to a humble guide. The wise old man archetype fragments into multiple forms. Jung cannot cling to a single image of spiritual mastery. It morphs. This reflects Jung's internal struggle with inflation. After his break with Freud, he risked identifying with visionary authority. The Red Book repeatedly humbles him. Prophets shrink, certainties dissolve. The psyche refuses static hierarchy. The serpent crawling into the wall suggests hidden passages. What appears solid contains living movement. The psyche's structures are permeable. Boundaries conceal openings. Jung's inability to reach the wells exposes his hesitation. He is shown the source, yet cannot fully surrender. Wisdom remains just beyond grasp. This incompletion is crucial. The journey is ongoing. Insight arrives in fragments. The imagery of water flowing from collected light suggests integration of opposites, fire and water, sun and spring. light transmuted into liquid sustenance. It is a fusion of masculine and feminine symbolism, of intellect and feeling. The serpents, battling, transforming, curling into themselves, evoke cyclical balance rather than final victory. Jung's early interpretation of light conquering darkness reveals his cultural conditioning. The deeper lesson rejects triumphalism. In psychological terms, this vision dramatizes the integration of shadow. The black serpent does not disappear. It is not annihilated by white light. It participates in transformation. Jung must accept that darkness is not external enemy, but internal component. Elijah's statement that the place above and below is one dismantles Jung's spatial metaphors for morality. Heaven is not far from hell. They are intertwined states of consciousness. The descent into the cave after ascending the temple implies that spiritual ascent without shadow work leads back into darkness. Unprepared, true elevation requires prior descent. Jung's fear and hesitation are not signs of failure, but markers of authenticity. He does not romanticize the journey. He records doubt, confusion, and incomprehension. The Red Book is not a triumphalist narrative. It is a document of struggle. The Christmas setting reinforces rebirth. Yet this birth is not serene. It is turbulent, serpentine, ambiguous. The newborn light is not sentimental purity, but transformative fire. As Jung leaves the cave, the vision lingers unresolved. That unresolved quality mirrors individuation itself. Wholeness is not achieved through final clarity, but through continuous dialogue with the unconscious. The temple collecting light and releasing water resembles the psyche's capacity to transform experience into meaning. The sun's radiance alone cannot sustain life. It must be converted into nourishment. The shrinking and expanding scales remind Jung that perspective is fluid. Ego inflation collapses before archetypal magnitude. What he perceives as external landscapes are internal terrains. In the broader arc of the Red Book, Elijah and Salome represent an early confrontation with opposites. The serpent battle elaborates that tension. It visualizes polarity in motion rather than static opposition. This imagery anticipates Jung's later formulation of the self as the union of opposites. The self is not purely luminous. It encompasses shadow. The mandala, another symbol Jung would later explore, reflects this integration. The vision of the serpents wrestling beneath Elijah's watchful presence suggests that consciousness must witness conflict without premature judgment. Observation precedes integration. The dwarf guide's promise of wisdom from hidden wells underscores the necessity of humility. Knowledge derived from heights is insufficient. One must drink from the depths. The courtyard's silence after the descent evokes the loneliness of individuation. No external validation accompanies this journey. It is interior and solitary. The serpent returning to the wall indicates continuity. The unconscious does not vanish after a vision. It remains active, weaving through structures of awareness. Jung's confusion at seeing the same place above and below signals the collapse of linear progression. Spiritual growth is not a ladder, but a spiral. One revisits depths from new heights. In this way, the vision dissolves simple dichotomies: good versus evil, spirit versus matter, ascent versus descent. It reveals a dynamic field where opposites interact. Jung's willingness to document these encounters without sanitizing them is what makes the Red Book extraordinary. He does not reduce the serpents to metaphors. He experiences them as living realities within his psyche. The Christmas vision of 1913 marks a threshold. Jung has entered a mythic interior landscape. Elijah no longer stands merely as biblical prophet, but as archetypal guide. Salome no longer merely temptress, but embodiment of eros and shadow. The serpents no longer enemies, but transformative currents. The battle on the rock is not about victory. It is about exchange. The whitening of the black serpent's head signals possibility. Darkness can reveal light, but only through engagement. And Jung, standing between day and night, must learn to inhabit both without denial. He says, "You wanted to come here far too much. I did not deceive you. You deceived yourself." He sees badly who wants to see. You have overreached yourself. And there it is, the first cut, the clean incision that separates curiosity from compulsion. Jung's hunger for revelation has become a kind of intoxication. He isn't being punished for seeking, he's being corrected for grasping. The unconscious does not respond well to conquest. It answers devotion, patience, and the willingness to be changed. But it resists demand. That's why Elijah's words land like a verdict. You wanted it too much, and wanting it too much makes you blind. Jung answers with something close to confession. He admits the longing, the dizziness, the shock of Salome's presence, how what she said felt like madness. He asks where she is, not because he misses her comfort, but because part of him needs to keep track of the forces moving around him. He is still trying to manage the vision, like a professional managing a case file. And Elijah cuts through that too. Step over to the crystal and prepare yourself in its light. Prepare yourself. Not understand this, not interpret it, prepare. The language shifts from analysis to initiation. In these pages, Jung is no longer merely a man witnessing symbols. He is being placed inside a ritual. The crystal becomes an altar of images, and what appears is not gentle. He sees the coarse peasant's boot, the foot of a giant crushing an entire city. He sees the cross, the removal of the cross, the mourning, images that collapse history into a single unbearable pressure. Violence, authority, sacrifice, the spectacle of suffering. He stops yearning. The hunger that brought him here is scorched out of him by the sheer weight of what the vision demands he look at without flinching. Then something even stranger arrives, the divine child holding opposites in his hands. A white serpent in the right, a black serpent in the left. Not one serpent, not one path, not one clean answer, but the living evidence that wholeness carries duality openly. This is not a morality play. This is the image of integration placed inside the cradle of innocence. The child is not protected from contradiction. The child is born, holding it. He sees the green mountain, the cross of Christ on it, blood flowing from the summit like a river. And again he can't bear it. The cross returns, Christ in torment, the black serpent coiling at the foot. And now the vision stops being about something and becomes something that happens to him. The serpent winds around his feet. He is held. He spreads his arms wide, not as a gesture of devotion, but as a forced posture. The body is recruited. The symbol becomes a position the psyche must inhabit. And this is where the text becomes truly unsettling, because the unconscious does not merely show Jung suffering, it pushes him into identification with the suffering figure. Salome draws near. The serpent wraps around his whole body. His countenance becomes that of a lion. This detail matters. The lion is royalty, ferocity, solar power, the heart that is both noble and dangerous. Jung's face becomes the animal that both protects and destroys. The psyche is telling him, if you want the mystery, you must accept the predator in you too, not as a sin to be confessed, but as a force to be integrated. Then Salome speaks the line that detonates the entire scene. Mary was the mother of Christ. Do you understand? Jung replies that an incomprehensible power forces him to imitate the Lord in his final torment. But how can he presume to call Mary his mother? Salome answers simply, "You are Christ." This is the kind of sentence that can't be handled with a modern literal mind. Taken literally, it sounds like grandiosity or psychosis. Taken symbolically, it is the most brutal demand of individuation. You must become the suffering one. You must stop observing the myth and allow the myth to claim you, not because you are special, but because you are human, and the human psyche contains the pattern of sacrifice, death, rebirth, and redemption as an inner process. You are Christ does not mean you are divine. It means you are the site where the crucifixion happens. You are the place where opposites tear the body of the ego apart until something deeper can be born. And Jung stands there, arms outstretched, like someone crucified. The serpent tightens, blood streams from his body down the mountain. This is the image of psychic cost. It's not the clean Instagram version of transformation. It is not healing as a pleasant glow. It is transformation as compression, as constriction, as pressure intense enough to extract blood. Then Salome does something that changes the entire atmosphere. She bends to his feet and wraps her black hair around them. She lies there and she cries. This is not seduction, this is mourning, this is devotion, this is the Eros figure, once blind, once feared, finally shifting into something else. And in that moment, Jung sees light. Truly, she sees. Her eyes are open. This is a hinge. Salome's blindness was never merely a moral condemnation of desire. It was the image of Eros without consciousness, instinct without seeing. Now she sees. And what happens when Eros becomes conscious? The serpent falls from Jung's body. The constriction releases. The ordeal loosens its grip. The serpent lies languidly on the ground, not destroyed, not banished. Resting, integrated enough to stop strangling. Jung steps over it and kneels before Elijah, whose form shines like flame. Elijah says, "Your work is fulfilled here. Other things will come. Seek untiringly and above all, write exactly what you seek. Write exactly." This is the ethic of the Red Book. Honesty as a spiritual discipline. Not prettifying, not sanitizing, not turning revelation into ideology. Record it. Keep it precise. Don't lie to yourself to make it acceptable to others. Salome looks in rapture at the light streaming from the prophet. Elijah transforms into a huge flame of white light. The serpent wraps around her foot as if paralyzed, and Salome kneels, struck with devotion. Notice what has happened. The seductive figure becomes the worshipper. The prophet becomes pure light. The serpent remains present but subdued. The scene doesn't solve the psyche by removing its dark elements. It reorganizes the hierarchy. Light is not a weapon now. It is presence. Desire is not an enemy now. It is devotion. Darkness is not annihilated now. It is quiet. And Jung? Tears fall from his eyes, but he does not remain in the glory. He hurries out into the night like one who has no part in the glory of the mystery. His feet do not touch the ground. He feels as if he is melting into air. This ending is psychologically perfect. The ego cannot stay in archetypal intensity. It can only be visited. Too much contact and you dissolve, inflate, fragment, lose your footing. Jung's flight back into the night is not cowardice. It is self-preservation. He has touched something too large to inhabit permanently. Now, if you step back from the imagery and you ask what this passage is doing, it becomes a map of a specific kind of transformation. The movement from moral dualism into integrated wholeness through embodied suffering and conscious eros. At first, Jung wants the mystery the way a hungry mind wants answers. Elijah confronts him with the cost of that hunger. He sees badly. Who wants to see? The desire to possess insight is itself a blindness. It turns the sacred into a commodity. It makes the unconscious into a vending machine. Elijah's correction is not anti-seeking, it is anti-grasping. Then Jung is shown catastrophe. Boot, giant foot, crushed city, cross. These images strip away spiritual romanticism. They say, If you want the truth, you must face what humans do, what power does, what cruelty looks like, what sacrifice costs. The psyche does not become wise by imagining light. It becomes wise by enduring what light reveals. Then the divine child appears holding both serpents. This is the image of the self, not as perfection, but as the capacity to hold contradictions without denial. The child is the new center, innocent and total, not naive, but whole. Then the ordeal of identification arrives. Jung is crucified by the serpent, lion-faced, bleeding. This is the ego being stretched into archetypal form. The ego cannot remain the manager. It must become the participant. It must be broken open enough to allow a deeper center to speak. And then Salome, the Eros figure, moves from blindness to sight, through grief. Not through moral purification, but through tears, through sorrow, through devotion. Eros becomes conscious. The serpent releases. This is a message that echoes across Jung's later work. What is repressed returns as strangling force. What is integrated becomes energy that can rest. In this scene, the serpent is not Satan. The serpent is libido, life force, instinct, the coil of necessity. When it wraps around the ego, it suffocates. When it is acknowledged and given a place, it lies down. It remains, but it stops devouring the center. Elijah turning into white flame is the final intensification of spirit, but notice, Jung cannot own it. He cannot stay. He flees into the night. The psyche does not grant him the fantasy of permanent illumination. It grants him a contact, then pushes him back into human limitation. That limitation is not failure, it is balance. And this is where the Red Book becomes less like a diary and more like a scripture of individuation. It is not telling you what to believe. It is showing you what happens when you take the unconscious seriously enough to let it remake you. Because the most dangerous misunderstanding of these passages is to read them as either literal theology or literal madness. The right lens is symbolic reality, images that are not fake, not mere metaphors, but psychological facts expressed in mythic form. When Salome says, "You are Christ," the point is not that Jung is the historical Jesus. The point is that each psyche must pass through a crucifixion of its own, an inner death of false identity, so that something more whole can be born. The myth is not outside you. The myth is the shape your transformation takes. And this is why Jung's family guarded the Red Book for so long. Not because it is scandalous in a superficial way, but because it shows the raw mechanism of spiritual and psychological transformation. It shows a respected clinician stepping into a space where the modern mind has no comfortable language. It shows him praying to his soul, arguing with archetypes, bleeding in symbol, being humbled by visions he cannot master. It makes the respectable world uncomfortable because it refuses to pretend that the depths are tidy. If you take one lesson from this final passage, let it be this: the unconscious does not want you to be good. It wants you to be whole. And wholeness is not achieved by fleeing darkness, but by learning how to stand in the tension until sight opens, until the blind parts of you begin to see. The serpent will not disappear. It will either strangle you from the shadows or rest beside you in the light. And the price of that shift is the same price Jung pays here: the collapse of craving, the humiliation of overreaching, the ordeal of identification, the tears that come when desire stops pretending it is pure, and the quiet instruction that remains when the vision fades. Seek untiringly. Write exactly. Because the work does not end in the temple. It begins when you walk back into the night and live what you saw.